The room was a cathedral of silence. Darkwood drank the light. Leather-bound books stood like silent soldiers on the shelves, their spines unbroken, their stories unread. They were not for reading. They were for weight. Alessandro Costello sat behind a desk carved from the heart of an ancient oak. It was as wide as a river and just as dark. He was not a large man. But he filled the room completely. His presence was a physical thing, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe too deeply. He was looking at a ledger, his finger tracing a line of numbers that represented ships, and cargo, and men. His world was a world of numbers. Of profit and loss. Of assets and liabilities. Marco, his lieutenant, stood by the door. He was a statue carved from loyalty, his eyes fixed on nothing, yet seeing everything. Two other men, shadows in expensive suits, flanked the entrance to the study. This was the routine. The quiet hum of power. Then, a sound. A disruption. The heavy oak door creaked open. Not flung, not pushed. It eased open with the hesitant tremble of old age. An old woman stood in the doorway. She was frail, a bird with hollow bones. Her hair was a silver cloud, and her hands, clasped before her, were a roadmap of a long, hard life. She wore the simple grey uniform of the house staff. A cleaner. A ghost who moved through the grand house unseen, unheard. Until now. Marco stiffened. A flicker of disbelief, then anger, crossed his face. He took a step forward. "Boss, I am sorry. I don't know how." Alessandro did not look up from his ledger. He simply raised a hand. A small gesture. A king halting an army. Marco froze. The two guards became even more still. The air thickened, charged with the violation of a sacred rule. No one entered this room unbidden. No one. The old woman took a shuffling step inside. She did not seem to notice the armed men. She did not seem to feel the crushing weight of the room. Her eyes were fixed on Alessandro. They were not eyes filled with fear. They were filled with something else. Something ancient. A sorrowful recognition. She took another step. Alessandro finally lifted his head. His eyes were the color of slate, cold and flat. They were eyes that had seen everything and felt nothing. He looked at her, this insignificant disruption, this speck of dust in his immaculate world. He expected a plea. For money. For a sick relative. For mercy. He had heard them all. She offered none of it. She just looked at him, her own eyes, faded blue like worn denim, searching his face. "I was there when you were born," she said. Her voice was a dry whisper, like leaves skittering across pavement. Alessandro's expression did not change. But something inside him went very, very still. The woman took a shaky breath. "I held you," she continued, her voice cracking. "Your mother, she put you in my arms." A long silence stretched, thin and taut. The old woman's eyes filled with a lifetime of rain. "I should have raised you. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will redefine the meaning of power and family." Like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The words hung in the air. They were not a request. They were not an accusation. They were a statement of a fact from a world that was supposed to be dead and buried. Alessandro Costello's world was built on the foundation of forgetting. He had forgotten his childhood. He had forgotten the father who had forged him in a crucible of cold ambition. Most of all, he had been made to forget the mother he never knew. She was a ghost. A name on a marble headstone. A single, faded photograph he kept locked in a drawer of his massive desk. A woman with sad eyes and a gentle smile who had died bringing him into the world. She was a void. A silence. The one subject no one in his organization ever dared to speak of. And this old woman, this cleaner with hands gnarled from scrubbing floors, had just spoken of her. She had put a voice to the ghost. Marco, ever the protector, saw only a threat. A breach. He moved again, his voice low and urgent. Boss. Let me handle this. Alessandro's gaze remained locked on the woman. He saw the tremor in her hands. The genuine, unscripted grief in her eyes. This was not a performance. This was an unearthed memory, painful and real. Leave us, Alessandro said. The command was quiet. So quiet it was almost lost in the vast room. But it carried the force of a thunderclap. Marco stopped. He looked from the woman to his boss, his face a mask of confusion. This was not protocol. This was the opposite of protocol. Strangers, especially ones who spoke of the past, were removed. Swiftly. Boss? Marco asked, a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. You heard me, Alessandro said, his tone unchanged. All of you. Out. The guards exchanged a glance but turned without a word, their movements sharp and obedient. Marco hesitated for a second longer, a loyal dog unwilling to leave his master's side. Alessandro finally tore his eyes from the woman and looked at Marco. It was just a glance, but it was enough. Marco gave a slight, stiff nod and backed out of the room, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The click of the latch was unnaturally loud. Now, they were alone. The titan in his fortress and the ghost from his past. Alessandro gestured to one of the leather chairs that faced his desk. Chairs where powerful men sat and trembled. Chairs where deals that shifted the city's balance of power were made. Sit, he commanded. The old woman shuffled forward and perched on the very edge of the cushion, as if afraid to take up too much space. She looked small and lost in the enormous chair. Your name, Alessandro stated. It was not a question. Ilara, she whispered. My name is Ilara. You worked in my father's house. I did, she said, nodding. I was your mother's personal maid. More than that. We were friends. We were girls together, from the same village. Alessandro leaned back in his chair. The leather groaned softly. He pictured the father he remembered. A cold, hard man who saw people as tools or obstacles. The idea of him allowing his wife a friend seemed impossible. My father did not approve of friendships with the staff, he said, testing her. A flicker of the old fire appeared in Ilara's eyes. Your mother, Isabella, she did not care what he approved of. She had a light in her. A stubborn 1 inch. Isabella. He had not heard her name spoken aloud in 30 years. It felt foreign on the air of this room. She was so happy when she knew you were coming, Ilara continued, her voice growing stronger with the flow of memory. She would talk to you for hours. She would sing to you. Old songs from the village. Alessandro's jaw tightened. He felt an unwelcome stirring in his chest, a phantom limb aching for a touch it had never known. She made me promise, Ilara said, her gaze distant. She had a feeling. A fear. She said, Ilara, if anything happens to me, you watch over my boy. You make sure he knows my songs. You make sure he knows he was loved. The room was silent again. The weight of a 3-decade-old promise settled between them. You broke your promise, Alessandro said. His voice was flat, devoid of accusation. A simple statement of fact. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes and spilled down the wrinkled channels of her cheeks. He wouldn't let me, she cried softly. Your father. After she was gone, he couldn't stand the sight of me. I reminded him of her. He threw me out. That very night. With nothing. He told the staff that if anyone ever spoke my name, or your mother's, they would join me. The story clicked into place. It had the cold, brutal logic of his father's actions. Pruning away anything that felt like weakness. Erasing the past. I tried to find you, she said, her voice choked with tears. For years. But he had moved. Hidden you away. By the time I heard the name Costello again in this city, you were already this man. Untouchable. I was an old woman scrubbing floors. How could I reach you? Alessandro said nothing. He simply watched her, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. His entire life had been a carefully constructed fortress, designed to keep the world out. And this old woman had walked through the gates with a key he never knew existed. Why now? He finally asked. The question was sharp. The businessman returning. The man who understood motive. After all these years, you risk coming here. Why? Ilara's grief-stricken face shifted. A new emotion took its place. Fear. A raw, desperate fear that was not for herself. It is not for me, she said, her hands twisting in her lap. I would have carried my silence to the grave. It is for my granddaughter. Sophia. Alessandro waited. She is a good girl, Ilara began, the words tumbling out in a rush. She is studying to be a nurse. Her mother, my daughter, she passed away last year. It has just been me and Sophia. I do not make much, it is hard. She took a ragged breath. Sophia, she needed money for her books. For her tuition. She did not want to worry me. So she went to a man. A moneylender. A coldness settled in Alessandro's gut. He knew these men. Vultures who circled the desperate. His name is Silvio, Ilara whispered, the name like poison on her tongue. She borrowed a small amount. So small. But the interest, it grows like a weed. Every week, it doubles. We cannot pay it. Now he says the debt is too large for money. Her voice broke completely. He says Sophia will work it off for him. In one of his clubs. He is coming for her tonight. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading, stripped of all pride. I have nothing, she said. I have worked my entire life, and I have nothing to save her with. I have no one to turn to. Then I saw you. Here. I have been cleaning this house for a month. I did not know it was yours until I saw your picture in the hall. When I saw you, I remembered my promise to Isabella. She reached into the pocket of her worn dress and pulled out a small, crumpled wad of bills. She smoothed them out on her knee with trembling fingers. A few fives. Some ones. Maybe $30 in total. She pushed herself off the chair, shuffled to the desk, and placed the pathetic offering on the polished wood. This is all I have, she said, her voice barely audible. I want to hire you. To protect my Sophia. Like I was supposed to protect you. Alessandro looked from the crumpled bills to the old woman's tear-streaked face. The world of numbers, of profit and loss, dissolved. He was no longer Alessandro Costello, the feared boss. He was a boy who had never heard his mother's songs. He was a debt that had just come due. He looked at Ilara's hands, worn down to the bone from a life of service. A life that should have been spent raising him. A life his father had stolen from her. From both of them. His own hands, clean and unblemished, rested on the desk. They were hands that could sign a death warrant or order a fleet of ships. They were powerful hands. But they had never been held by a mother. The internal calculus of his life, the cold logic that had guided him for decades, was failing. This was not a business transaction. This was not about territory or respect in the way he understood it. This was about a promise made over his own cradle. He thought of the faded photograph in his drawer. The woman with the sad eyes. Isabella. She had put him in this woman's arms. She had trusted her. And his father, in his cruelty, had cast her out. He had severed the last living link to his wife, and in doing so, had severed his son from his own past. For 30 years, Alessandro had lived as a man without a history, a man who sprang fully formed from the cold ambition of his father. He had accepted it. He had even used it as a weapon. A man with no past has no weaknesses. He had been wrong. His weakness was not in the past. It was in the absence of it. Ilara stood before him, a living, breathing piece of that past. And she was asking for his help. Not for herself. For her blood. For the future she had been allowed to have, even if he had not. To help her would be to break every rule he had ever lived by. His operations were clean, impersonal. He did not get involved in the petty cruelties of street-level thugs like Silvio. It was beneath him. It was messy. It was emotional. To refuse would be to become his father. It would be to look at this woman who had held him as a newborn and tell her that her granddaughter's fate was not his concern. It would be to ratify his father's decision from 3 decades ago. To cast her out all over again. He looked at the small pile of money on his desk. It was an insult. It was a prayer. It was the most valuable payment he had ever been offered. He made his choice. It was not a choice made with the cold logic of a crime boss. It was a choice made in the sudden, shocking silence of a boy's empty nursery. Alessandro reached out and slowly, deliberately, pushed the crumpled bills back across the polished surface of the desk toward her. "This is not enough," he said. Ilara's face crumpled in despair. She thought he was refusing. "I can get more," she stammered. "I can work." "No," Alessandro interrupted, his voice soft but firm. "It is not enough for what you have just given me." He stood up. He walked around the massive desk and stood before her. He was not much taller than her, but the difference in their stations was a chasm. He reached out and gently took her trembling hands in his. They felt like brittle twigs. "You will not pay me," he said, his voice low. "I will pay this debt. The one your granddaughter owes. And the one my father owes you." Ilara stared at him, her mouth slightly open, confusion and a dawning, impossible hope in her eyes. Alessandro turned his head toward the door. "Marco," he called out. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the thick wood. The door opened instantly. Marco stood there, his face a carefully neutral mask, but his eyes were filled with questions. "Boss?" "We have a new client," Alessandro said, still holding Ilara's hands. Marco's eyes darted to the old woman, then back to his boss's hands holding hers. The sight was so alien, so profoundly out of character, that Marco's composure visibly cracked for a second. "Her name is Ilara," Alessandro continued. "She is to be treated as my own mother. Do you understand?" The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Marco's eyes widened. He had never, in 15 years of service, heard Alessandro mention his mother. "Yes, boss," Marco said, his voice tight with shock. "There is a loan shark," Alessandro said, releasing Ilara's hands gently. "His name is Silvio." He walked back behind his desk, once again the commander in his fortress. The brief moment of warmth was gone, replaced by chilling efficiency. "I want to know everything about him," Alessandro ordered. "His businesses, his associates, his home. I want to know where he breathes, where he eats, where he sleeps. I want it in 1 hour." "And the granddaughter?" Marco asked. "Sophia." "Find her," Alessandro said. "Find her now. Before he does. Bring her to the penthouse at the Argento. Keep her safe. No one speaks to her. No one touches her. Just keep her safe." Marco nodded. "And Silvio?" Alessandro's eyes became chips of ice. "When you have the girl secured, you will find Silvio," he said. "And you will bring him to the warehouse on the pier." Marco's face became grim. He knew that warehouse. It was a place for final conversations. A place from which people did not return. "It will be done, boss," Marco said. He gave Ilara a look, no longer of suspicion, but of awe and profound respect. He turned and left, the door closing with a decisive thud. Alessandro turned his attention back to Ilara, who was watching him with a stunned expression. He pointed to the small, crumpled pile of bills still on his desk. "Take your money," he said softly. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face again. But these were not tears of fear. They were tears of disbelief. Of gratitude. Alessandro, she whispered, saying his name for the first time without the title of a boss. Her name was Isabella. Your mother. She would be so proud. For the first time in his adult life, Alessandro Costello did not know what to say. He simply nodded. The plan was simple. It was brutal. It was what he did best. Power was a tool, and Alessandro was a master craftsman. For years, he had used that tool to build an empire of fear and order. He had used it to carve out his territory, to enforce his rules, to amass a fortune. Tonight, he would use it to correct a small, personal injustice. He would bring the full, terrifying weight of his organization down on the head of one greedy, cruel man. It was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It was overkill. It was necessary. Marco worked with the silent, terrifying efficiency Alessandro demanded. The city was a web, and Marco knew how to pull the threads. Within 40 minutes, the information flowed back. Silvio was a bottom feeder, a predator who operated on the fringes of the underworld. He had no real power, no significant alliances. He was a bully who preyed on the weak because he was terrified of the strong. His business was built on the tears of people like Ilara. He owned a string of dingy bars and a few backroom gambling dens. His office was above a grimy establishment called the Gilded Cage. The report also located Sophia. She was at her part-time job, a small diner, finishing her shift. Terrified. She had been getting threatening calls all day. Alessandro gave the order. Secure the girl first. 2 of his best men, dressed not in suits but in the plain clothes of city workers, entered the diner. They approached Sophia quietly. They showed her a picture on a phone. It was a picture of Ilara, safe, drinking tea in the lavish kitchen of Alessandro's mansion. Your grandmother sent us, one of the men said, his voice calm and reassuring. You are in danger. We are going to take you somewhere safe. The girl, pale with fear, looked into their eyes. They were not the eyes of men like Silvio. They were calm, professional. She saw the picture of her grandmother, and a sliver of trust broke through her terror. She nodded. They escorted her out the back entrance, into a plain black car, and drove her away into the night. Away from the predator circling her. Phase 1 was complete. Now, for Silvio. Marco led the second team himself. They did not storm Silvio's office. There was no noise, no violence. It was a ghost operation. They entered the Gilded Cage through the service entrance, moving through the back corridors like shadows. 2 men disabled the security cameras. Another 2 secured the exits. Silvio was in his office, drinking expensive whiskey and laughing with 2 of his thugs. He was celebrating his new acquisition. He was talking about Sophia. The words he used were ugly. Marco listened through the door for a moment, his expression hardening. Then, he opened it. Silvio and his men looked up, startled. Their laughter died. They saw Marco, flanked by 4 other men, all dressed in dark, well-tailored suits. They held no visible weapons, but they were more menacing than an army. Who the hell are you? Silvio blustered, trying to project an authority he did not feel. Marco ignored him. He looked at Silvio's 2 thugs. You have one chance to leave this room and forget you ever saw us, Marco said, his voice dangerously quiet. I suggest you take it. The thugs were not brave men. They looked at their boss, then at the silent, imposing figures in the doorway. They saw the abyss that separated their world from the world these men came from. They scrambled for the door, nearly tripping over each other in their haste to disappear. Silvio was left alone, his face pale, the whiskey glass trembling in his hand. What is this? He demanded, his voice thin. Who sent you? Mr. Costello requires a moment of your time, Marco said politely. The name hit Silvio like a physical blow. Costello. Alessandro Costello. He was a legend. A nightmare. A man you prayed you never met.
I?
I have no business with Mr. Costello, Silvio stammered. This is a mistake. There is no mistake, Marco said, stepping into the room. He wishes to discuss a debt. Two of Marco's men moved forward and lifted Silvio from his chair as if he weighed nothing. They did not rough him up. Their movements were clean, precise, and utterly terrifying. They led him out of the building, down the back stairs, and into another waiting car. The entire operation, from entry to exit, had taken less than 5 minutes. It was as if they had never been there. The warehouse on the pier was cold. The air smelled of salt and decay. A single bare bulb hung from the high ceiling, casting a pool of harsh yellow light on the concrete floor. Alessandro Costello stood in the shadows, just outside the light. When Silvio was brought in, he was shoved into the center of the light pool. He blinked, his eyes adjusting. He was sweating, despite the chill. He saw the silhouette of the man in the shadows. He could not see his face, but he felt his presence. It was a crushing weight. Mr. Costello, Silvio began, his voice quivering. I swear, whatever this is, it's a misunderstanding. I have always respected your territory. I have never. Do you know a woman named Ilara? Alessandro's voice came out of the darkness. It was calm. Conversational. Silvio's mind raced. Ilara. The old cleaning woman. The grandmother of the girl. It couldn't be. An old woman? Silvio asked, confused. Yes. Her granddaughter owes me money. It is a simple business matter. Tell me about this business matter, Alessandro said. Silvio, thinking this was about money, about protocol, began to relax slightly. This was a world he understood. The girl, Sophia, she borrowed $500, Silvio explained, a hint of his usual arrogance returning. The interest is high, I admit. But that is the business. She fell behind. The debt is now significant. How significant? Alessandro asked. 20,000, Silvio said. He left out the part about his intention to collect the debt in flesh, not cash. $20,000. For a $500 loan, Alessandro repeated slowly. He stepped out of the shadows and into the light. Silvio got his first clear look at the man. He was older than he expected. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his face impassive. But his eyes were ancient and cold. That seems unfair, Alessandro said. It's the terms of the agreement, Silvio insisted, puffing out his chest. She signed the paper. Yes, Alessandro said. The paper. But you decided the paper was not enough. You decided her debt would be paid in a different currency. You were going to take the girl. Silvio's blood ran cold. He knew. That is a lie, Silvio sputtered. Alessandro took another step closer. I do not like liars, Silvio. And I do not like men who prey on children. She is not a child. Silvio retorted. And her grandmother, that old woman, she has no one. No one cares about her. It was the wrong thing to say. A profound stillness came over Alessandro. He looked at Silvio as if he were a specimen under glass. That is where you are mistaken, Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You see, that old woman, she is not just anyone. He paused, letting the silence stretch. That woman held me on the day I was born, Alessandro said softly. She was a friend to my mother. A mother I never had the chance to know. He let the words sink in. He watched the understanding, and the absolute terror dawn on Silvio's face. By threatening her family, Alessandro continued, you did not just break a business rule. You did not just cross into my territory. You reached back 30 years and you put your filthy hands on my family. He looked at Silvio with a chilling emptiness. My father took my mother from me. Then he took this woman from me. He took away my entire past. And tonight, you tried to take her future. Alessandro turned his head slightly toward the shadows where Marco stood waiting. The debt is $20,000, you say? Alessandro asked, looking back at Silvio. Silvio, trembling uncontrollably, could only nod. Pay him, Alessandro said to Marco. Marco stepped forward. He was holding a heavy canvas bag. He opened it and dumped the contents onto the concrete floor at Silvio's feet. It was not money. It was $20,000 worth of casino chips from one of Silvio's own backroom tables. Useless outside his own crooked games. There, Alessandro said. Paid in full. In your own currency. Silvio stared at the pile of worthless chips, then back at Alessandro, his face a mask of pure terror. He finally understood. This was not about money. This was about retribution. Please, Silvio begged, falling to his knees. Please, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. That is the point, Alessandro said, his voice devoid of all emotion. You did not know. You did not care. You saw a frail old woman and a young girl with no one to protect them, and you saw an opportunity. You were wrong. Alessandro turned his back on the weeping man and began to walk away, melting back into the shadows. What she has is not a no one, Alessandro's voice echoed in the cavernous space. She has me. He did not need to give another order. He did not need to watch. Marco knew what to do. The chapter of Silvio was closed. Permanently. He would not be bothering anyone ever again. The penthouse at the Argento Hotel was one of Alessandro's private sanctuaries. It was a sterile, modern space of glass and steel high above the city. It had no personal touches, no history. It was a place for waiting. Sophia sat on a white leather sofa, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had been given food and water, but she had touched neither. She was waiting for an explanation. For her grandmother. The door opened. Ilara walked in, flanked by two of Alessandro's men. Sophia! Ilara cried out, rushing forward. Grandma! Sophia leaped from the sofa and they embraced, clinging to each other as if to a life raft in a storm. Alessandro stood in the doorway, watching. He felt like an intruder on the scene. This raw, pure emotion was a foreign language to him. He saw the love between them, the fierce, protective bond. It was the legacy his mother had been denied. It was the legacy Ilara had been able to build, despite the cruelty of the world. After a long moment, Ilara looked over her granddaughter's shoulder and saw him standing there. She gently pulled away from Sophia and led her toward him. Sophia, this is the man who helped us, Ilara said, her voice thick with emotion. This is Alessandro. Sophia looked up at him. She was a young woman, but her eyes were old with worry. She saw the expensive suit, the cold expression. She saw a dangerous man. The man? Silvio. She began, her voice trembling. Is he? He will not trouble you again, Alessandro said simply. The debt is gone. It is over. Relief washed over Sophia's face, so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. Tears of gratitude streamed down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. We can't ever repay you. There is nothing to repay, Alessandro said, his gaze fixed on Ilara. Ilara stepped forward. You are wrong, she said softly. She reached into her pocket and once again pulled out the crumpled bills. She held them out to him. This was our agreement. Alessandro looked at the money, then at her earnest face. A symbolic exchange. A matter of honor. Not for him, but for her. He did not take the money. You have already paid me, he said. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. You told me about my mother. You gave me back a piece of my own story. That is worth more than any amount of money. He saw the understanding in her eyes. This was not about charity. This was about settling accounts of the soul. Sophia, still watching him with a mixture of fear and awe, finally asked the question that had been hovering in the air. "Are you a bad man?" she asked, her voice small. The question was blunt. Innocent. Profound. It was a question Alessandro had never bothered to ask himself. He was what he was. Good and bad were labels for other people. He looked away from Sophia, his gaze settling on Ilara. He saw the woman who had held him. The woman who should have raised him. The woman who, in one desperate act, had given him a chance to be someone other than his father's son. "Today," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not name, "I was the man I needed to be." He reached into his coat and took out a small, simple mobile phone. It was not a smartphone. It had no screen, just a single, large button. He pressed it into Ilara's hand. "This is for you," he said. "There is a car waiting downstairs. It will take you and Sophia to a new apartment. It is paid for. It is safe. You will never have to worry about rent, or bills, or men like Silvio again." Ilara stared at the phone, then at him, speechless. "If you ever need anything," he continued, "anything at all, you press this button. It will find me. I will come." He was not just offering protection. He was offering connection. An open door. A promise that this time, she would not be cast out. She clutched the phone to her chest. "Alessandro," she whispered. "Thank you." He simply gave a short, stiff nod. He had done what he came to do. It was time to return to his world of shadows and silence. He turned to leave. "Wait," Ilara said. He stopped, his back to her. "She sang you a song," Ilara said. "That night. Before you were born. A lullaby from our village. About a little boat, safe in the harbor." Alessandro stood very still. He did not turn around. "I remember the tune," she said softly. He waited. But she did not sing. It was enough that he knew. Without another word, he walked out of the room and closed the door on the life he might have had, and the new one he had just saved. 1 year later. The study was the same. The dark wood. The silent books. The massive desk. Alessandro Costello sat in his chair, but he was not looking at ledgers. He was looking at 2 photographs that stood on the polished surface. One was the old, faded image of his mother, Isabella. A woman with sad eyes and a secret smile. Next to it was a new photograph, in a simple silver frame. It was a picture of Ilara. Her face was no longer etched with worry. The lines of hardship had been softened by a year of peace. She was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile. In her arms, she was holding a swaddled baby. Her great-grandchild. Sophia's son. Ilara sent a new picture every month. Alessandro kept every single one in a locked drawer. All except this one. This one stayed on his desk. His mother, whom he had never met. And the woman who should have raised him, now raising the next generation in the safety he had provided. His world was still one of danger and secrets. He was still a man to be feared. But something inside him had shifted. The void his mother had left was no longer completely empty. It was now filled with the echo of a promise kept. He had used his power not for profit or for vengeance, but for a quiet act of justice. An act of redemption. Power, he had come to understand, was not just the ability to destroy. It was the ability to protect. True strength was not in being untouchable, but in choosing who to touch with kindness. Sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought for territory or for money, but for the soul. And sometimes, a man who has lost his past can find his future in the simple, selfless act of saving someone else's. In the end, it is not the darkness we command that defines us, but the single flicker of light we choose to protect.